nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvat Kṛṣṇa-kathā mahāmudaḥ mudākelatu Bande Bhagavatani Mananudavam Murdnani Patyakshito. Namo Mahavarinyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohanu Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Adadanastrinam dantoy yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasyabila Shati Vala Barashva Shirupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdhanta Hayechurastam Raganugami Bhajanola Samanasanam Shiradhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shirupa Parashita Chetasame Chittam Satam Marup Kariyatu Padapadme Yaram Yanikilaga Sangashamani Shutratritim Sangata Yasvadya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yadhari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Prema Purushottam, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Charjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire in this world, Sriman Rupa Goswami Pad. Again, today we'll discuss Padyavali, and we're here in the Kṛṣṇa-kathā Mahatmya Prakaranam, the section about the greatness of Sri Kṛṣṇa-kathā. So in our last reading we heard a few verses in praise of Kṛṣṇa-kathā, saying that it's far superior to the discussion found principally in the Upanishads, discussion of the analytical method of realization of Brahman, wherefrom no melting of the heart and the symptoms of melting of the heart, such as streams of tears pouring from the eyes, where this melting of the heart does not occur, where there is no such discussion of Hari, which is the ultimate cause of melting of the heart, then let that remain. Let that discussion of the Upanishads, or the import of the Upanishads, remain afar. In other words, we want only to discuss Hari such that our hearts shall melt out of longing for Him. This acquaintance with the Paratattva, this form of experience of the Paratattva, is the sole aspired aim of the Bhaktas. And also we heard that not only is hearing of Kṛṣṇa-kathā superior to discussion of the process by which moksha or realization of Brahman can be achieved, but it's superior even to the experience of moksha itself, and superior to the state of sayujya that is attained as a result of moksha, or that is, what constitutes moksha in its ultimate form as sought on the Jnana-marg. So we heard such praises of Kṛṣṇa-kathā. So also in the Gita, we hear in the Chatushloki, the 4 essential verses of the Gita, that Mad chitta mad gatha prana buddhayantas parasparam kathayantas cha mam nityam tusyanti cha ramanti cha. That Bhagavan describes his bhaktas as having given their hearts to him, as having their vital air rest upon him. And as such, they always speak of him, they enlighten one another about him, and they rejoice. They feel great satisfaction in doing so. So, in that spirit, we'll hear today the remainder of this prakaranam, another few verses which Sri Rupapad cites in praise of Kṛṣṇa-kathā. So we'll pick up today from verse 34. So this is another verse which describes Kṛṣṇa-kathā as superior even to moksha. And as we find in the Bhagavad and elsewhere, to say something is superior to moksha implies that it's superior to everything of the world, since the attainment of moksha, as per the Taittiriya and elsewhere, is said to be an order of Ananda, superior to any order of Ananda that can be found in any state of worldly embodiment, whatever loka, whatever status, whatever it may be. So, here Kṛṣṇa-kathā is described as superior to all things attainable in the world and superior to moksha as well. So, this comes from Sridhar Samipad. Tvat-kathāmṛta-pāthodhau viharanto mahāmudaḥ kurvanti kṛtinaḥ kecic caturvargaṁ tṛṇopamam. Most blissfully reveling in the ocean of the nectar of discussion of you, some fortunate ones consider the caturvarga to be like blades of grass. So, a strong statement. So let's look at the commentary. The term caturvarga, or quote, group of 4, refers to dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And the comparison of the caturvarga to grass is for the purpose of conveying that the caturvarga is considered fit to be disregarded by those who relish the nectar of discussion of Hari, such that it is as insignificant to them as the pleasure animals find in chewing grass. So another sense of, typically in this context when a comparison with grass is made, is to say that it's worthless, something like a bit of straw along the path. This is nothing that anyone is going to stop to pick up or is going to consider to be of any consequence at all. One won't hesitate to step on it as one walks along the path. It's considered worthless or unfit for any attention. So the term caturvarga, as well as the term trivarga, so the quote, group of 3 or group of 4, it comes in ancient language, it's found in the Gita and elsewhere, to refer to either the first 3 of the 4 purusharthas or the group of all 4. So as a way of compressing reference to a wide scope of shastric discourse into just a term, you have this useful phrase, caturvarga. So we can say that Srimad Bhagavatam is like the shastra that starts from the premise of pursuing something beyond the caturvarga. And this is what's discussed in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto, when the whole core content of the Bhagavatam is explained. So this comment of Sridhar Samipad conveys that primary import of the Bhagavat and of the act of hearing about Krishna, which is the central feature of the Bhagavat, if you will. And also, here the way the commentator takes it to refer to the pleasure felt in chewing grass. So there's a verse in the Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, Labdva sudurlabhamidam bahusam bhavante manushya martadam artapatim manushya martadam anityam api hadhira. How does it go? I haven't quoted this verse in so long. Vishaya kalu sarvata syat is how it ends. Anyway, I'm forgetting the third line. Anumritya javat, something else is there. Anyway, the sense is that describes the attainment of human birth, and saying that human birth is very rare to attain. There are so many living entities throughout the universe, and so few, comparatively, that achieve the fortune of being born in a human body. And having the buddhi, or the faculty of intellect, the faculty for understanding of Bhagavan, that is unique to the human body. That is the point made in the previous verse of the Bhagavad, where it says, Brahma loka vadishana, that the Creator, when he created all other living forms, he wasn't satisfied. But when he created the human form, he felt satisfied, because that form alone has this Brahmavalokana dishana, or this intellect by which perception of Brahman, meaning the Paratattva, the Supreme, the ultimate form of which is Bhagavan, is possible. So it says that human form, which has that unique faculty, is very rare to attain. Labda sudur labamidam bahusam bhavanti. After many births, someone may get it. Manushanam artadam, and it's highly valuable. In other words, with it, one can achieve that ultimate object. Anityam apiha dhira. And it's also temporary. It doesn't last long. It could be lost at any day. So it's a tremendous fortune which comes along very rarely and may be lost at any moment. So what to do? Quickly, and as long and until one dies, one should pursue nishreyas, or pursue the highest good, or pursue whatever one understands to be the ultimate attainment. And then in comparison to attainment of that ultimate attainment, it says Vishaya kalu sarvata syat, that otherwise the experience of vishay, or the experience of being in an embodied state and having the experience of perceiving with the senses objects that are well suited to the senses that one is outfitted with, that pleasure of getting sense objects that correspond to the senses, that is had in every birth. So what tastes good to one type of body doesn't taste good to another body. What tastes good to someone conditioned to eat one way tastes bad to someone conditioned to eat another way. So when you get that object to which one's senses and conditioning is suited, and the pleasure of getting the right fit, so to speak, that is, the height of sense gratification. And from the spiritual perspective, that is considered trivial, or that is considered categorically inferior to experience of Brahman, experience of the Paratattva, ultimately experience of Bhagavan. So it describes that you can get that experience of, sensory gratification in any birth. So here when it says the pleasure animals find in chewing grass, means, it might be like the pleasure humans get in eating whatever their favorite food is, or whatever is most suited to their body and senses. That is relative, and that you can have in many places. So he's making a contrast, saying that this relish of Kṛṣṇa-kathā is so wonderful that even things that are considered otherwise, extremely great, such as moksha, even that is as trivial as the things that as the forms of happiness that someone leaves in order to pursue moksha. Anyway, this is the context, but we'll look here at the source of the inspiration for this verse of Samipad. So, in the Shruti Stuti, the 87th chapter of the 10th canto, then we have an instance where the Shrutis, or sometimes what they call the personified Vedas, offer praises to Bhagavan. And it goes on for 20 plus verses, and for every one of these verses, which are quite thick, if you will, and have a lot of philosophical import, and are one of the most challenging areas to comment on in the Bhagavatam, then in that section, Samipad writes a verse of his own to convey the import of each of those verses of the Shrutis in this stuti that they offer to Bhagavan. So the verse under discussion is the poetic rendering of the gist of a verse 21 in the 87th chapter. In other words, this is Samipad's poetic way of conveying the gist of this particular verse in the Bhagavatam. So we can further appreciate what Samipad wants to say by looking at the Bhagavatam and the source from which this poem is inspired. So that verse is as follows. O Ishvara, some, that is, a rare few. So the word kecic means some, but the commentators, they take it that by mentioning some, they don't mean many, they just mean a few. So according to context, the word some is usually referred to a group that is not complete or is not a majority, but whether or not it's a small minority or a great minority has to be understood from context. So in this context, the import is that by saying some, it means a rare few. So, O Ishvara, some, a rare few, who have become free from suffering, or alternately fatigue, you can translate the word, or the commentators take it in two different ways, have become free from suffering or the fatigue by swimming in the vast ocean of the nectar of the activities of the form you have revealed to teach the difficult to understand nature of yourself. So by swimming in this nectar of this ocean of this nectar of discussion of Bhagavan, or he who manifests himself to the jivas of the world so that they may come to understand him, to know him, to have prema for him, to make known what is otherwise unknowable to them, and thus described here as your nature, which is difficult to understand. So, again, some who have become free from suffering by swimming in the vast ocean of the nectar of the activities of the form you have revealed to teach the difficult to understand nature of yourself, and who have given up household life by virtue of the association of the flock of swans at your lotus feet, do not desire whatsoever, even liberation, that is, let alone svargo or the pleasures of earthly life. So these persons, they're swimming in this ocean of nectar, swimming in this ocean of discussion and thought and contemplation of worship of Bhagavan. And they've come into the association of others who are so much absorbed in that, so much satisfied by that, that they can't live without it. That has to be the principle, the sole activity in their life, and thus they decide to forsake the life of a householder, to fully absorb themselves in that. And so these few who have that taste, who feel that joy or that relief of suffering in the midst of that katha, and thus leave behind household life and remain in the association of these bhaktas of yours who are like swans at the lotus of your feet. So as swans love to eat, the whorls of lotus flowers, so bhaktas love to relish the nectar of discussion or of adoration of Bhagavan. And they're so satisfied by that they don't desire anything else. They don't even desire liberation. So this is the verse in general, and the commentators give a few different types of interpretations of the verse. I'm not going to go into a full analysis of all the interpretations of the verse. I'm just going to go into some that are specifically relevant to the way Samipad draws out the import of to such that he writes the poem that we're discussing here in the Padyavali. So Sri Jivapad cites this verse in Priti Sandarbha as an illustration of how an effect of Krishna Priti in the form of continuous contemplation, he uses the word anushilana, of discussion of Sri Bhagavan's qualities leads to disregard for moksha. So a big topic that Jiva Goswami goes into a lot of detail in the first, almost 60 anuchedas of the Priti Sandarbha, to establish Priti or Prema for Bhagavan as the ultimate Purushartha, or as the Prayojana, is that Priti or Prema for Krishna is superior to moksha. So he presents that conclusion, he presents numerous reasons for that conclusion, and in the course of doing so, he shows that not only is the attainment of Krishna Priti or Krishna Prem superior to the attainment of moksha, but he explains that even activities that one does for the sake of achieving Priti or for the sake of achieving Prema, or that occur as an outcome of having achieved it, even those are also felt and said to be superior to moksha. In other words, when people even take up the path to pursue this ideal, they become disinterested in moksha. So in the course of establishing this conclusion, he gives the example of anushilana, or this ongoing contemplation of what one hears or what is said about Bhagavan. And even that act of just thinking about Bhagavan, thinking about what one has heard about him, even someone who does that as it is, or in the richest sense, becomes so absorbed, becomes so satisfied by that, even that person doesn't care to be liberated any further, or they become indifferent to the attainment of moksha. They only want to remain engaged in such an activity. So this is how Jiva Goswami draws out the import of this statement. He also comments that, quote, the flock of swans at your lotus feet refers to the succession or parampara of disciples and grand disciples of those such as Sri Shukadev. So Shukadev meaning one who spoke about Bhagavan, one who spoke about Bhagavan such that his ultimate glory and the ultimate glory of prema for him and his prema for his bhaktas is appreciable. Then speakers of Bhagavad Katha like Shukadev, then from them, those who heard his Bhagavad Katha, those who then repeated to others, this is one type of parampara, which, we have to be careful how we use these terms, but can be described as, quote, a Bhagavat parampara, or a parampara as per the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavat method of Shravan Kirtan. So those who hear and repeat the glories of Bhagavan in the form of such discussion and kirtan, they're described here as being in a parampara, coming from someone such as Shukadev. So those who engage in hearing from a great Bhagavata about Bhagavan and relish that in their heart, contemplate that, and may in the future go on to repeat such things, then they participate in a succession of such, and are compared to a flock of swans at Bhagavan's feet, or as if all these bhaktas who relish hearing this katha are like graceful swans, or what you call paramahamsas, who are there around the lotus, that is Bhagavan's feet. And so he says that the flock of swans at your lotus feet refers to the succession of disciples and grand disciples of those such as Sri Shukadev, who disregard the bliss of moksha as a result of fully relishing the sweetness of Bhagavan's lotus feet. So this is a primary feature of the early portion of the Bhagavatam, where it's explained how Shukadev was, had full status in the view of those following the Jnana-marg, was, a Jivan Mukta and so forth, but nevertheless came and absorbed himself in Bhagavad Katha and Bhakti to Bhagavan, as per what is described in the famous Atmarama verse, Atmaramas Chamunayo Nigranti Apiyo Rukrame, kurvanti hoitukim bhakti mitam bhuto guno Hari. Hari has such qualities that even these persons who are completely satisfied within the self, who are free from any involvement in ignorance and bondage in the world, even they take to bhakti to him. Okay, so these are general points about the verse. Thus, Sri Samipad's mention of, quote, some fortunate ones, or kṛtinaḥ kecic, in this verse under discussion can be taken to mean a few bhakti rasikas, as is affirmed by Sri Chakravartipad in his commentary on this verse, which colorfully conveys the spirit of the verse under discussion, composed by Sri Samipad. So, Chakravartipad, in his commentary on this verse, in his Sarta Darshani, he gives an interesting way of interpreting the verse, and then at the end caps it off by also citing from Samipad's commentary this verse which we're discussing here in the Padyavali, and his commentary is following the line of thought of Sridhar Swami, so to speak. So, let's see how Chakravartipad does this. It's a colorful analogy, which I can't think of any other place where this type of analogy is used by any of the acharyas. For me, it was a first to see such an analogy employed. So it says as follows: O Ishvara, some, that is, bhaktas of little prevalence, meaning a few rare bhaktas, whose profuse fatigue, produced by repeatedly immersing themselves in and emerging from the whirlpools in the vast ocean of the nectar of your activities, in the form you have revealed to teach the difficult to understand nature of yourself, that is, the nature of your figure, qualities, leelas, grace, mastery, and sweetness, which are unable to be understood by jivas in general otherwise. So let me just pause here. So, in the verse itself that we're discussing, there's this verse, parishrama, so that people who are becoming free from parishram. So parishram can in general refer to suffering, or can refer more specifically to a state of fatigue. So generally the word shrama means labor, and then according to context can mean toil, suffering, in the sense that labor can be something that's miserable if it's excessive. But it can also not necessarily refer to it in a negative sense. It can also refer to fatigue or labor in a sense that doesn't necessarily imply that one is suffering as such, but simply that one is engaged in an activity which drains one's energy. So according to context, the lighter sense of the word can be applied, or the stronger sense of the word can be applied. So that's why in the earlier translation I put suffering, or you could take it as simply fatigue. So in the case of Chakravartipad, he reads it as fatigue. And so he's saying that quote, immersing oneself and coming in and out of these whirlpools of the ocean and in the ocean of the nectar of discussion of you, that it's as though, discussion of your form, discussion of your qualities, discussion of this lila, discussion of that lila, is like all these different whirlpools out in this ocean that one can, one's mind can start to circle around and one can get, absorbed in, that there's a fatigue from that one is doing all of this, and that it can take up one's energy as a result of doing something which is so exciting, so enriching, if you will. So those persons who's saying here, have profuse fatigue, or they're getting a lot of fatigue that as a result of all of their engagement in this discussion of you. A little bit like in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, sometimes it says that Mahaprabhu would go on chanting in the Sankirtan for hours and hours, and the bhaktas would be, at this one hand, overjoyed to be chanting with Mahaprabhu, and on this other hand, getting exhausted and hungry. And sometimes Mahaprabhu would be so absorbed, he wouldn't be aware of how much time had passed or how everyone around him was feeling. And Swarup Damodar or someone would have to come and say, Prabhu, it's well after midday, let's break the kirtan for some time, let's let the bhaktas have some rest and some prasad. So there's a certain fatigue that can come which is a joyful fatigue or a wonderful fatigue produced by being so much engaged in varieties of bhakti. So when one is feeling such fatigue, then how does one feel? So he says that such bhaktas do not desire even liberation, that is the pleasure of moksha, much less the pleasure related to the trivarga, that is dharma, karma, artha, and kama. So this quote-unquote fatigue that they feel is better than anything else that they could ever desire or pursue. That fatigue is more desirable than the quote peace or freedom of moksha, or the rest of being at leisure to do whatever one likes, or do nothing due to one having such wealth and opulence that one needs to exert nothing in order to remain content. Okay, so now he comes with his analogy. He says, only that, however, they desire. In other words, they only want more of this fatigue that they're feeling. They don't want anything else, and they certainly don't want something, quote-unquote, as a fruit or as a result of this. Just this, intense experience that they're having engaged in this bhakti, that itself is all they want. So here he gives an analogy to understand that. Only that, however, they desire. Only the pleasure of the fatigue of repeatedly immersing themselves in and emerging from the waves in the vast ocean of the nectar of your activities. So if someone is, out in some, river area with many different eddies and whirlpools and, swimming in different swimming holes and diving in and then swimming across and coming out and diving in again, if anyone's ever gone out to, mountain river swimming holes or something like that. This is what the analogy is referring to. So that's something that people do for fun in the worldly sense, but at the same time it's also something tiring. So this is the purport. Now he gives his own analogy. As very handsome youths who are covetous of objects of the senses consider the fatigue produced by sexual intercourse a pleasure that is greater than all other forms of pleasure, even though they are intolerant of even a small amount of exertion. In other words, young teenagers who don't want a job, they don't want to work, they don't want to do anything laborious, but the labor of sexual intercourse, they're up for that. They take pleasure in that type of fatigue, but no other. He says, so exactly, just like those teenagers who don't want to do anything but take pleasure in having sex, so exactly your bhaktas, considering the fatigue of dancing, chanting, shouting, clapping their feet, not their hands, clapping their feet. That means jumping up and down and clapping your feet together as you jump, falling down, fainting, arising, bewailing, calling out, ha, ha, weeping and melting, that is becoming emotionally overwhelmed, and so on, that arises from drinking in the sweetness of discussion of your leelas, to be the ultimate pleasure. So these bhaktas who become exhausted with all this chanting, dancing, singing, weeping, there's such intense physical and emotional, bursts, if you will, they feel that this fatigue, or the exhaustion that they feel from that, is the ultimate pleasure. And as such, they consider the pleasure of relishing, that is realizing and becoming fixed in pure awareness of Brahman, to be like an animal's pleasure in chewing grass. So I put that point earlier. It's actually reflected here from Chakravarti Pad's explanation. Thus it is said by Samipad, and here he quotes our verse, most blissfully reveling in the ocean of the nectar of discussion of you, some fortunate ones consider the caturvarga to be like blades of grass. So just as followers of the Jnana-marg, they say, the pleasure animals feel in chewing grass, that's the pleasure that you get from your sex and wealth and power and fame and all this, mundane things. We have to pursue moksha. So now he's saying that the bhaktas, for them, they consider even that moksha that the jnanis are seeking to attain no better than the sense gratification that the jnanis are rejecting, thinking that the pursuit of moksha is even greater. So these bhaktas are most blissfully reveling in the ocean of the nectar of discussion of you, and thus they consider the caturvarga like blades of grass. So this reveling, in other words, this swimming, is tiring, but yet highly desirable and highly fulfilling. So in this way, we see how Chakravarti Pad has cleverly illuminated this verse of Samipad. So, we'll move on. Okay, I see a hand here. Do you have something to say?
Well, simply the file is cut off after the tika recorded. Maybe later noise.
Okay. Next, the compiler cites a verse that describes the assembling of all tīrthas at a site of discussion of Sri Kṛṣṇa in a manner that resembles the assembly of a royal entourage at the site of a king's arrival, or that indicates that all tīrthas assemble at a site of discussion of Sri Kṛṣṇa for the sake of their own purification. Tatraiva Gaṅgā Yamunā ca tatra Godāvarī tatra Sarasvatī ca sarvāṇi tīrthāni vasanti tatra yatrācyutodāra-kathā-prasaṅgaḥ. There indeed is the Gaṅgā, there the Yamunā, there the Godāvarī, there the Sarasvatī, and there all tīrthas are present, where there is absorption in charming discussion of Acyuta. So I'm reminded in the Prem Bhakti Chandrika, Thakur Mahashaya says, tīrthayatra, what is it? Kore Brahm, Kevala Manera Brahm, tīrthayatra parishram, Kevala Manera Brahm, Sarva Siddhi Govinda Charan, I believe is how it goes, where he says that this travels to these tīrthas, this is just parishram. This is just a bunch of labor. So the same word parishram that was in the last verse in the Bhagavatam, there, in this case, Thakur Mahashaya, when he says parishram, he's not talking about a blissful parishram. He's talking about parishram that's not fun. In other words, that's, draining and exhausting and undesirable. So he says, tīrthayatra parishram. It's very laborious. It's a big exertion to go to the tīrthas. In other words, there's no AC coaches and private cars and all this of the modern day. When he's writing that, he's talking about hiking for months through, desolate areas where you're liable to get robbed. He's talking about a very different notion of tīrthayatra. So he's saying, tīrthayatra parishram. This is a big exertion, this is a big toil. Kevala manera brahm. And it's just a mistake of the mind, or it's just a misunderstanding that is motivating someone to go and take up all that trouble. Sarva Siddhi Govinda Charan. All your attainment will happen there at the feet of Govinda. In other words, wherever you are, hear about Bhagavan, talk about Bhagavan, absorb your mind in Bhagavan. That's the whole point. You don't need to walk off somewhere else to go do that. Just do that wherever you are. You'll gain spiritually far more than simply making an arduous pilgrimage to some place. So here, that point is, you could say, is expressed, and also the commentator here draws out the import that that where Bhagavad Katha is happening, there is so much purification that the purification that you can get from making a trip to the Gaṅgā, making a trip to the Godāvarī or wherever, that same purification and more you can get by hearing this katha. This katha, the stream of Hari Katha, is more purifying, we can say, than even, the water of the Gaṅgā, or the water of the Godāvarī, or the physical acts of going to these places. So that's one import. And another import is that these tīrthas themselves, they assemble, the devis of these tīrthas, they come to hear Kṛṣṇa-kathā. They relish hearing about Bhagavan, and they purify themselves of all the pollution put into them by all the various people who bathe in them by hearing Bhagavad Katha. So the supreme purification is Bhagavad Katha. There's that, I forget how it goes. There's one verse at the end of the Brahma Stav in the 10th canto. Param param vi param. No, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But it describes there that the supreme source of purity is Bhagavan, or discussion of Bhagavan. Anyway. Yeah, that's the verse. Here, I'll just pull it up. One sec. Gone this far, we might as well hear it. Here you go. Samashrita jay padava plavam mahatparam punya yasho murare. That's what I was thinking of. Where it says punya yasha. So Bhagavan is described here as he whose fame or whose glory is purifying. So to take shelter in the lotus feet of those bhaktas who are always engaged in discussion of that of Murari, or Bhagavan, whose punya yasha, or is he whose glory is so purifying, then those persons, they cross over this world as though it's water in the hoofprint of a calf. So, if you can cross over the whole world as though it were just a bit of water in the hoofprint of a calf, you certainly don't have to go on a long hike for months off to some tirtha to do so. If you can find that sangha, and if you can hear that katha, that will be all sufficient. So this is the thrust of this verse. It's trying to stress, again, this prakaran is putting stress on the value of hearing Bhagavad Katha. That the Yamunā is mentioned in here, that, there's no value to residing in Vraja or visiting Vraja. That won't be the import here. There is also significance to that. And this is a statement being made in general for the purpose of referring to the greatness of Kṛṣṇa-kathā in comparison to the idea of tīrtha yatra, conceived in a broader sense than it might be by followers of the Raganuga path of Rupa Goswami, or followers of those whose Ishta Devata is Krishna specifically. That this statement is in reference to something, a more broader consideration. All right, and let's look. We have one more, so we'll look at this final verse in the prakaran. Next, the compiler cites a verse that describes discussion of Sri Krishna's being a bestower of results in accord with the mentality of the listener. So, the Krishna Nam is described as a chintamani, nama chintamani Krishnas, chaitanya rasa vigraha, that what you wish for as when you chant the name, that the name will bless you with. So we get a similar point made here about not just Krishna's name, but all discussion of him. So we hear the following. Ya bhukti-lakṣmīr bhuvi kāmukanam, ya mukti-lakṣmīr hidi yoga-bhājām, yānanda-lakṣmī rasikendra-mauleḥ, sakāpili lāvatu madhavasya. May some particular lila of Madhava, which is a wealth of enjoyment on the earth for the covetous, which is the wealth of mukti in the mind for practitioners of yoga, or which is a wealth of bliss for the best of the foremost of rasikas, protect you. So by saying sakapi, that some lila of Madhava, it means any lila of Madhava, any lila of Bhagavan, it may be heard from different perspectives. It may be heard from persons whose aim is different things. For persons who are seeking punya, or seeking some merit for doing some religious act such that they acquire dharma, such that they can then achieve artha and kama. In other words, those who are pursuing trivarga and using bhakti as a means to that, then that lila of Madhava is like here a wealth of enjoyment. Or as you can see in 3 lines, it says bhukti-lakṣmīr, mukti-lakṣmīr, and yānanda-lakṣmī. So the word Lakshmi, especially in classical Sanskrit literature, is not always used to refer to Lakshmi Devi, the consort of Narayan specifically, but to a goddess in general. So, sometimes even in other cultures, people will speak of the will of the gods, or they'll compare something desirable to a goddess. In a general way, they're not referring to any particular goddess, but they're referring to something great, desirable, fortuitous, etc. So the word Lakshmi is used in that sense in this context. So this quote, bhukti-lakṣmīr, or this wealth, or this fortune, or this goddess of enjoyment. So this lila, it's like a goddess, or it's like a source of treasure. In other words, by hearing it, by doing the meritorious act of showing respect to it, I'll acquire some merit, and with that merit I will get what I want in this world. So for those who have that, what you call sakham bhakti aim, then this lila is like a wealth of enjoyment, or it's like, a goddess that bestows enjoyment upon them. Whereas for jnanis or yogis, who may be using bhakti as a means to the pursuit of moksha, then this lila, or this act of hearing about Bhagavan, this act of bhakti, is here called mukti-lakṣmīr, or it's compared to a wealth of mukti, or a source by which, or a means by which they can achieve mukti. But for rasikendra-mauleḥ, or for those who are the best of the foremost of rasikas, in other words, those who are bhaktas, those whose only aim is to relish Bhagavan himself, relish bhakti for Bhagavan, whose taste, so to speak, is for that alone, then this lila, it is yānanda-lakṣmī, or it is just a wealth of bliss itself. There's nothing beyond it. There's no other thing to get. Just that act of hearing about Bhagavan is itself the great joy that they relish. So for them, it's like a Benedictine goddess that grants bliss itself. So the poet here is speaking broadly, saying, may such a lila protect you. In other words, whatever it is you want, may that lila bestow it upon you, or may you have what you so wish. Should you be of this category, of that category, or of a third. Alright, so let me just read the comments here. The commentator explains that particular leelas of Madhava, be they primarily expressive of his mastery, Aishwarya, or sweetness, Madhurya, are described as non-different from the enjoyment, liberation, and bliss, that is prema, sought by materialists, yogis, and bhaktas, respectively, because of Madhava's leelas being causes of experience of a profusion of enjoyment, liberation, or bliss, that is prema, as so desired by various listeners. Just as it is said, ghee is life, or gritam ayu gritam, that is, just as ghee is said to be life because it is widely considered a means of long sustaining one's life. In other words, a cause is sometimes described as, or referred to as, the effect that it produces, because it's well known to be a very effective cause. So ghee is life means ghee leads to long life, so you will have life if you have ghee. So get ghee and you'll get life. So ghee is life. Along these lines, then here it's saying this lila, it's a bhukti-lakṣmīr, it's a mukti-lakṣmīr, it's an yānanda-lakṣmī, it's everything. It is those things because it so effectively leads to all three of them as per the interest of the listener. So that's it for today. This concludes the prakaran on Kṛṣṇa-kathā. And in the coming prakaran, then we enter dhyan. It says, atā dhyanam. So we'll hear some verses of meditation upon Bhagavan. So we'll hear a few different verses which describe Krishna, all of his dress, his bodily features, various aspects of his attractiveness, and so on. So the coming prakaran will be now upon meditation upon the object of bhakti. So we started out with the greatness of Krishna, then we went to the greatness of Krishna bhakti, then we went to greatness of particular aspects of Krishna bhakti, such as the chanting of Bhagavan's name and discussion of Bhagavan. So now we come to put that into action, so to speak, and speak about him such that one meditates on him, such that one cognizes his attributes, and so forth. So returning to then meditation upon that Ishta Devata of the text itself. So I'll conclude here for today. If anyone has any comments, questions, or anything else, feel free to share.
Yeah, may I have a little question here?
Yeah.
You quoted this Namasi Tamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa verse. It's composed by Rupa Goswami, right?
It's cited by Rupa Goswami from the Padma Puran.
And it's in Padyavali? Or?
Yes, we discussed it earlier here in Padyavali.
Yes. So this, maybe I didn't pay attention to previous lectures, but this, you just said that what it says, this verse, is that basically whatever desire you may have, the name as Is that right?
Yes, the Achintamani, as when you hold this jewel in your hand, whatever you want, the jewel gives you that.
Would that be, by quoting him, this verse, would it contradict the whole idea of Uttama Bhakti, where it says, Sanyabila Shita Shunyam? Sounds like contradictory to me. And I understand he makes another point by quoting this verse.
I mean, this is a verse which is showing the power of the name. Mm-hmm. It's not telling people to chant the name and desire this, that, or anything. It's just saying that the name has the power to grant anything that one so desires. Mm-hmm. What should you desire? That Rupa Goswami has plenty to talk about, plenty of advice. He has quite a strong, elaborate design to suggest how you might be best benefited by desiring one thing and not others. That no doubt is very important to Rupa Goswami. But the verse itself is not encouraging people to desire something other than bhakti. It's just in praise of the power of Bhagavan's name, indicating that Bhagavan's name has the power to grant anything, just as Bhagavan himself does. And just as we see that many have done different types of tapasya to satisfy such and such devata, and sought such and such boon, and been given that.
I just remember, I think you met one Vaishnava somewhere who told you, the power of the holy name is so amazing. If you want to become president of the country, just chant for 3 years.
Yes, I remember that. I don't think I'll share this advice all that widely because it might fall into the wrong hands. It gets very problematic if someone's not fit for the post.
Right. But then I wonder if the name is as liberal as it is, just grant its blessings even to faithless or wrongdoer.
Well, I mean, how many asuras got boons from Mahadev? How many people, they seek power, they seek certain attainments, and then they ultimately ruin themselves with them. And so, Bhagavan says, I reciprocate with people as they approach me. If they want something cheap, I give them what they want. If they want me, I give them myself. those who worship, this, they get that. He reciprocates in kind. That's not a fault in and of itself. And to neglect to do that can lead to partisanism or bias, which is considered a fault. But we also see that the graciousness of Bhagavan is praised beyond his quality of being a, quote, wish-fulfilling tree or a wish-fulfilling jewel, in that to truly benefit someone, it's not the highest thing you can do for them is not just give them whatever they want, but also help them to desire what's actually best for them. That's in one sense as important, if not more important, than being the one who can grant them what it is they want. Because how many people, do we see who want something that's ultimately detrimental to themselves? This is, you could say, the whole problem of ignorance, the whole perpetuation of samsara essentially rides on that condition of people being in ignorance, not knowing what's in their best interest, and desiring something less than would actually be good for them, or contrary to what is good for them. So Bhagavan's graciousness then isn't just that he gives boons to asuras or whoever does this or does that, but that he gives knowledge of what's actually in one's best interest and how actually one can be truly fulfilled. But the trouble with ignorance is that when you're in it, you don't necessarily recognize that you're in it, and then you don't want that knowledge, which is actually the biggest grace upon you. So you ignore the knowledge and then just keep trying to get whatever it is you want from your state of ignorance.
Right. Or accept selected knowledge, you selectively accept whatever suits you. Thank you.
All right, very well. Well, then let's conclude here for today. And in our next session, we'll begin the dhyan, the meditation upon Krishna. Vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe.
Jai Shri Radhe.